Greetings, race community. Brent coming in live from the RV in Key West, Florida, and I'm excited to welcome Phil Castleberry, who serves as Vice President for University Advancement at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Now, to all you listeners who've been on the journey with me by way of the podcast or at EverTrue more broadly, I have to share that RIT holds a very special place in my heart because my co-founder, Eric Karlstrom, studied computer science at RIT. And as we were getting to know each other, before we agreed to actually partner up in the business, we decided to go on a road trip out to RIT. And it would be a chance for him to reconnect with his alma mater, a chance for us to do some early pre-product customer conversations. And we made must have been 7-hour drive out to Rochester from Boston, got 2 speeding tickets along the way, which depleted our very limited resources at the time, but we had a great trip out there. So, Phil, I'm just going to share, Phil joined RIT in February of 2020 in this capacity, 6 weeks before the pandemic started. And so he has not only gotten to know a new institution, but an entire team in an almost fully remote context while trying to generate revenue for the institution at the same time. So has been juggling a lot, has learned a lot, and I really want to welcome him so he can share some of that, the highs and lows of the last year and where we go from here. So welcome, Phil.
Thanks. And I'm blessed in the sense that there were a lot more highs than lows, despite everything the world threw at us last year, for me personally.
Love it. So we'll get into all of that, but one of the things I like to do to frame these conversations is just understand your own college experience. And my understanding is that we're both first-generation college students, and that you were, able to pursue a degree in part thanks to philanthropic support. And I'd love to just know a little bit more about Phil in high school and kind of what your path to college was and what stands out during that time. Sure.
So I grew up in a military family. My father was career Navy. In his late 60s, he's still working for the Navy as a civilian. So that was a childhood that was picking up and moving with some regularity, which wasn't always great growing up. But in hindsight, I think it was great preparation for this line of work because you learn to adapt quickly, thrown into new environments, and start to build relationships. High school was Orlando, Florida. And I've been enamored with airplanes from as far back as I can remember. So I actually, in high school, started taking pilot lessons and got my license and thought that was the path that I would take. My parents, were supportive of college, but, weren't financially in a position really to support it. And really said, if you're doing it, good luck. Go get some scholarships. So I wanted to pursue aviation. That made the search easy because the number of 4-year degree programs out there were few. And I should mention that one of my neighbors was an airline pilot who had strongly said, get the 4-year degree. Don't make that your priority. So with his guidance, I narrowed down a pool. I really wanted to go to Purdue, to be honest, but financially that wasn't going to work. So Central Missouri State University, now the University of Central Missouri, ended up offering me a full scholarship, room, board, books. I actually profited later in my college career off of that scholarship. And so I went to Warrensburg, Missouri, to become an airline pilot, I thought. A semester in, I had a great American government professor who I'd always had an interest in politics and government, and I thought, well, maybe I want to go that path instead. And that's ultimately what I did. And so that's how I got to college. My college journey.
So can I just ask you to tell me more? I mean, I'm sure we've got some listeners out there, and myself included, who have had aspirations of getting that private pilot's license. So what's the real review of that experience, and what was it like the first time that you, did your first solo flight?
That's the memory I still have. And my first my first instructor, Ed Hodap was his name. He just passed away recently. And I hated Ed. I mean, I just absolutely hated the guy because I was a punk 17-year-old kid at the time. And we'd left the executive airport in Orlando. We flew down to Kissimmee near Disney World. And he had me, it's a smaller airport. We pulled off to the side and he told me, kill the engine. And he pulled out this, walkie-talkie basically, and he opened the door and he's like, all right, go do it. I had no idea. That was my first day, and it's probably the best way to do it. He knew I was ready, and I didn't have to think about it. I just had to do it. And
Wow.
Great experience. And I'm now beginning that process with my own son, who is 15, and so he's learning to fly, and it's forced me to reactivate my own license, which has been a lot of fun to get back into that.
I love it. And, I don't know how many advancement leaders can actually fly themselves to meetings with donors. So I don't know if you've had the opportunity to do that, but it's on the table for someday.
Early in my career, I did. If you read most university insurance and risk management policies, there's a lot of hoops you have to go through to actually get permission to do that. So I've never tried, but maybe I will as I get back into it now.
I love it. I love it. Well, like many people, in my understanding, you referenced it, but you did really not only pursue politics, but began to practice it, at least at a campus level, in your time at Central Missouri. And I'd love to just know a little bit more about your campus leadership, because I suspect that is some of what led you to get drafted to join the advancement shop upon graduating.
Yeah, it's funny. The other thing I'll share is I don't advocate this for anyone, but I did my undergrad experience in 3 years. There's absolutely no good reason for anyone to do that. But in my mind, I had goals and plans that I wanted to achieve. And so I was elected president of the Student Housing Association my freshman year in my second semester. And in that experience, I was looking at the student government and thought, I want to run that before I'm done. And at least for my campus, the path to that was Greek life. And so I'd not gone through Rush my freshman year, but I recognized that to achieve my goal, that was a step I needed to take. So fall of my sophomore year, I rushed, pledged Alpha Tau Omega, joined ATO. And for anyone who was in Greek life, the next thing that happened to me should also never happen, which is my chapter put me up for IFC, the Interfraternity Council presidency, as a pledge. And the strategy there was that we were having it was university-owned Greek housing, and there were lots of conflicts and issues, and I was bringing strong relationships to the table that could help us achieve what we wanted to do. And then for some reason, I got elected. And so that kind of just elevated my campus leadership spot. That year, I got elected IFC president. A beautiful Delta Zeta named Tracy Ettinger was elected Panhellenic president. I had not met Tracy until we were interviewed together for the campus newspaper. And we will have been married 19 years this year. So ATO was good to me in many ways, lifelong friends. I pursued it with a goal of it getting me somewhere, and I got so much more out of it. And then fast forward, I recognized at this point, I can get out of here a year early, go to law school, which was, my intent. What else do you do with a political science degree except go to law school, is what I thought at the time. And the sitting student government president, who was a good friend of mine, who also interestingly got into philanthropy professionally as well, had one semester left before he graduated. And so he came up with this idea and brought a proposal to me. Why don't I replace the current vice president with you on the ticket, and then you'll take over as SGA president for one more semester. And so that's what we did. We got elected, and I'm sure you'll get to this question in a minute. That paved the way for how I got into what I'm doing now.
Tell me about it. I mean, somebody spotted you and saw potential and probably introduced you to a line of work that you might not have even known was a career path.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, at that point, I had, honest to God, I had no idea that people gave money back to their college or university. I mean, it just never crossed my mind, and I wasn't exposed to it, which is unfortunate because there's a missed opportunity for lots of students to be educated on the power.
Even though you were an incredible beneficiary of it, you didn't really even know where it came from or how it.
Yeah, those guys were.
Yeah.
And I've thought back to, did I ignore it or did nobody tell me? And I don't think I ignored it. I just think the opportunity was missed. But a nice thing at Central Missouri was that the SGA president actually had a permanent seat on the president's cabinet. And so every Monday morning was sitting around a table with vice presidents, CFOs, all of that. And one of those individuals that I became very close to was the head of development. Pretty early in my term as president, she came to me and she said, what are your plans? I have a job open and I think you'd be great at this. And at that point, no, I'm going to law school. All said, I have the plan. We're executing the plan. So I graduated, got to summer, and started to realize that this wasn't really the plan that I wanted. I wasn't ready. I just turned 21. I recognize I didn't quite have the maturity to power through 3 more years of school. And so I reached out and, hey, is that job still available? This was back in the era when you actually could make those HR things happen really fast. And Marilyn Landers was her name. And she gave me my first break running the student phone-a-thon with touch-tone phones and paper pledge sheets. And I never gained a freshman 15, but you gained 15 pounds easily if you're running a phone-a-thon every night of the week, eating, pizza and all of that. But it was.
I think you just coined the phone-a-thon 15 for all you listening out there. We've had a lot of guests who have come up the ranks in the phone-a-thon, and if you also fell victim to the phone-a-thon 15, please shoot me a note and let us know. Maybe we'll do a future episode on that. But what were some of the highs? I mean, look, you went from not even knowing that raising money or people giving money was a thing, much less a career path, to running a high volume outreach program. You probably didn't have, I'm guessing it's one of those things you're basically thrown into it. You get a little bit of, tutorial, but, it's also somewhat common sense. What were some of the highs or lows? I mean, there is really an opportunity for some kind of documentary on phone-a-thon confessionals or something like that, because there are some funny stories that everybody has, good, bad, and otherwise. But anything stand out from that time in your indoctrination to the sector?
I remember, thank goodness I had some great student leaders who had come up as callers through the program and had become student supervisors. So we never
had more experience. They had more experience than you did, probably.
Far more experience, but thankfully they didn't have a college degree yet. And so, we never allowed student supervisors to run the program without me there. So I didn't benefit from that in a way that lots of programs get to now. But I think I learned a lot through them. The other thing is that, remember, I just graduated. So with the exception of the freshmen, I knew all of these people. They knew me. I think that helped. It helped me recruit and hire for sure.
Yep.
And call underperforming people out in a way that most people couldn't in a work relationship. I just remember, I think early on, just being surprised that you could call somebody and 5 minutes later, they're giving you their credit card number for $500. Again, it really blew my mind that happened.
And shortly thereafter, I mean, honestly, I'm a little bit surprised that you didn't hang around there for a few years, just kind of given that affinity, your experience, the connection. But shortly thereafter, you started, maybe like your military tours of duty, kind of going from base to base, and just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a bunch of things happened in that time. The job was offered to me always. I had deferred my law school admission for a year. Maryland hired me with an agreement that if I like it, this is a permanent job. You can stay with it and grow a career here, or you can leave after a year and go to law school. A lot of things had happened personally in my life, where if you've ever been to Warrensburg, Missouri, it's a fun place to go to college. It's not a place to be a young adult. And so I was thinking about what other opportunities could be, and I'll stress that it's so important that the relationships and the contacts and the networking that you do, professional contacts I've had for over 20 years now are still in my life and still play an important role. And maybe I shouldn't tell this story, but I will. So I was, Case District 6, the conference, at least then, would rotate Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis. So it was a Kansas City year. This would have been in 2001. And I was recently single. I should mention, even though I met Tracy, we didn't actually get together until after college. And so I'm at the Case conference in Kansas City, and you're meeting lots of people, but this one individual person, I picked up a phone number at the Case conference. I wasn't there to pick up, a significant other, but I did. And so she worked for the University of Kansas. That's hour apart. So we went out, and had dinner one night. We quickly realized that I was 21 who looked like he was 30, and she was early 30s who looked like she was 25. So once we realized that this huge age gap existed, nothing more happened other than a great professional relationship. But KU was hiring a phone-a-thon manager. And so I had reached out to her and said, what can you tell me about this job? And, so I was going through the motions on the brink of an offer. And she was actively interviewing at William Jewell College. They had a new vice president. Things were shifting. And she, when we were talking about KU, she said, I'm thinking about going to William Jewell, and I really like what's happening there. They have an annual giving director position. You should talk to the person. And so, again, this just doesn't happen these days. I had a phone call on a Wednesday. I was in Liberty, Missouri, which is just north of Kansas City, interviewing on Thursday. And I had a job offer Thursday night. And Friday morning, I took it. And so I was leaving Central, but I 22 at that point. I was a director. I had grown my pay by 15%. It's still, I'm not sure it was a living wage, but it was still more. And I was getting a chance to relocate and move to Kansas City and be kind of where an early to mid 20s person should be. And so that's kind of how that first move happened.
No, I appreciate the candor. And I think, look, relationships matter. And I think the relationships you built as a student leader, the relationships you build in the case circuit, all of that compounds over time, and you don't appreciate it at all in the moment. But I do think it's a reminder why it's important, and part of the reason why we even launched this podcast. Obviously, at a time when there's not a lot of case conferences or the same kind of in-person programming, it's been a chance for our listeners to hopefully get a window into your world and other leaders in the space, and build those connections. So I hope you have some of our listeners reach out as we go through this, but I think you're spot on that being intentional about that relationship building, it really does compound in unexpected ways. Mm-hmm. And so super young take on, of course, after 1 year in the phone-a-thon, you have everything you need to know in order to run an annual fund, right? And then why not step in as Director of Advancement Services while you're at it? So a couple year run at William Jewell, I'm sure you wore a lot of hats, small college, small community, tight-knit group, I'm sure, but probably a great way to just have to do a lot of things, drink from the fire hose a bit.
Absolutely. We'll talk about this in a minute. I worked then for much larger organizations, and I just wouldn't have been as grounded and learned as much starting at those places, especially as I did at William Jewell. It was, so new vice president, new president, concluding a campaign from the prior administration, celebrating it, setting the groundwork for the next campaign. All concepts that I had no idea were part of this work. My idea was that you dial phones from 6 to 9 p.m. and that's how you raise all the money. And really in that experience of, they'd been using an external firm for the phone-a-thon. The decision was made that wasn't producing the right return. We wanted to bring it in-house. I had just done that. So, was able to build that program from scratch using what I'd learned. We went through a whole rebranding of the annual fund, gave it a new name, a new purpose, and then built all of the collateral to go with it. Mm-hmm. Had a board member who was very invested in this work, and had opportunities, again, as a kid, and credit to my VP who created the opportunities for me and that board member to meet one-on-one and just talk strategy. Those types of experiences are just invaluable, and I've never forgotten it. We took, and created a $2.2 million annual fund, a true annual fund. I can get on my soapbox about, what, everybody defines annual fund in lots of ways.
This is the soapbox. This is your soapbox.
Yeah.
So what's a true annual fund?
I think a true annual fund is promoting, it's budget relief. How can you generate budget relief for your institution in an effort to, provide the maximum flexibility for your CFO, your president, your deans, et cetera, to redeploy dollars in where it's needed most.
But that's not exciting, Phil.
You can make it exciting. So
let's make it exciting. How do we make it exciting? Because I hear a lot of people saying that doesn't sell anymore.
So I think what we did at Jewell, I don't know if they still do this, but I think a lot of institutions could do it. We looked at the unfunded aid budget, and I can't remember what that number is, but let's say it was $20 million. So there's $20 million of operating revenue that is being funneled over into student aid in order to fill your class. And every one of our institutions do that to some degree. We're never going to raise $20 million in unrestricted dollars. So we branded the Jewell Fund as 100% of every dollar to the Jewell Fund goes directly to student scholarships. And it was a one-to-one. Money's fungible in that way.
Yep.
It's an honest, accurate statement.
Right.
And it worked. That message worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, look, all kidding aside, the opportunity, the strategies that seem to work is when you can marry unrestricted money with a clear impact. And we had a guest, Dr. Mark Barnes from Dillard University, who talked about a program they launched where that intersection of budget relieving but still unrestricted is really a missed opportunity for many institutions. They launched a program that was literally focused on unpaid tuition bills for seniors, that if they didn't get paid, the seniors couldn't walk or the seniors couldn't complete their degree. And so creating a program that was completely budget relieving, yet very marketable, right? Do you, like, Phil, could I count on you for a $2,500 gift so that Brent can walk with his classmates? Like, that is such a different story than, well, here's the pie chart of our expenses and here's the pie chart of our revenue, and there's a gap and we need to close the gap.
Yeah, you're right. That's I love that idea that Dillard's doing. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So we, at my former institution, and now, we're doing this at RIT. We've identified 18 general funds. So you can support the area that you're passionate about, but we're going to let that institutional leader make that determination, so that when a student has an opportunity to go present a paper at a conference and they go to their dean to say, is there any funding for this? There's a pool of money that the dean can use as these opportunities arise. Or when a global pandemic shuts your school down and 10% of your students don't have laptops, there's a pool of money there that we can immediately respond to that need. So we're really trying to talk about how the annual fund strategically positions RIT to give that experience to every student, take advantage of unique opportunities when they present themselves, and respond to unexpected needs and emergencies when and if they arise.
Love it. Let's fast forward to your time at WashU, because I know that was a formative experience for you. It was obviously a different type of institution, a different type of community, a more national certainly population. What was it like getting settled in there? Any culture shock, or did you hit the ground running?
Tremendous culture shock. WashU for me was the first place where I recognized just how much wealth exists in our country. I was coming out of $5,000 and $10,000 gifts and thinking, gosh, I'll never in my life be able to give away $5,000 to someone. This is amazing. To a point where, very quickly I was asking for $100,000, $250,000 gifts, and not blinking. The donors weren't blinking.
Were you blinking, or was that a natural transition?
It took a little bit of adjustment. But I got there pretty quickly, because it's a lot more fun to ask for $250,000 than it is $2,500.
Okay.
And then, this was the first place where I had, travel intensive responsibilities. So that, I'd never had that true experience of building a trip. And then I just found that to be so, it's what I miss terribly about our current environment. Still, even a year ago, the ability to check out of the office for 3 days and do nothing. And those are grinding days. You can sometimes be going from 7 a.m. till 11 at night, trying to hammer out some contact reports before you go to bed, and then you do it all over again the next day. So all of that, I got such a good exposure to just high level major gift work. And then at the same time, because I was based in an academic unit, began to develop relationships with faculty, and got exposed to that side of a research university. That I was just so fulfilling. The relationships were fulfilling. I was learning something new every day. And then I had a lot of fun in that model of, so we had a huge regional program, and helping to facilitate, a regional director comes back from Dallas and, gosh, they're really interested in this. Is anybody doing this work? And helping facilitate those conversations. I just love the complexity and diversity of my work there.
Phil, can I ask, did you overlap with Amanda Tribune at all while you were there? Do you recall that name? I think you
Yeah,
might have had a few months together. She's now the senior vice president at Western Kentucky University. But I just hosted her on the podcast recently. It hasn't even aired yet. But she had worked for her alma mater, Western Kentucky, before joining WashU. And it just had a very similar experience, culture shock. She was covering the Northwest, talked about, even having an accent, being from the South, and the questions she would get from the donor population. And it's just coincidental that it sounds like you had sort of a similar experience.
it was. And yes, Amanda did come in. We overlapped a bit near the end of my time there and the beginning of hers.
So any just like real, either, memorable success stories or challenges during that period?
I'll tell this story here that, if you've ever worked with me, you've heard this story because it's my most memorable and most transformative gift story. And it was my first million, and you never forget your first million. But we had an alumnus, I won't say his name, obviously, but, here was somebody that, Rob Gibson, who had hired me at WashU, was transitioning to the University of Rochester. That connection will come back again here shortly. And he was transitioning his New York City portfolio to me, and he had just a phenomenal portfolio. And this one individual that we went to visit was a $5,000 annual donor, very consistent. And so we went in with the strategy, all right, let's get him up to $10,000 a year. Okay, so we got this gentleman up, no question, $10,000 a year. That's great. Happy to do it. So I continue that relationship, and pretty soon after, I'm like, all right, let's get him to an endowed scholarship. So I'm like, all right, so he's given $10,000 a year, not using any scientific logic here. Well, let's ask him for $100,000. So I get the visit, go in, we sit in his office, and I put the ask out there. He thinks about it, he asks a couple of questions, and
Phil, what'd you say? How'd you phrase it? I mean, what's the real, roughly the language you used?
I would guess that I probably was, Gary, we're so grateful, your recent increase from $5,000 a year to $10,000 a year, really making an impact. Endowed scholarships is a real priority for us at WashU, and talk about, whatever the scholarship and tuition stats were at that time. Have you ever thought about endowing a scholarship, making your annual gift a permanent part of WashU? Would you consider $100,000 scholarship? Here's a brochure. So please have our brochures, which I now realize you don't really need.
But it's a real crutch. You lean on those brochures, right?
Right. So he thought about it, and he's like, I don't think that's something that I want to do right now. But let's talk about it, again, but I'm not going to do that right now. I went into that meeting 100% sure he was going to say yes. There's no doubt in my mind. And in a way that I hadn't been before, I remember just being a little shell-shocked, to the point that I didn't reach out to this person for 6 months, maybe a little longer than 6 months, even though I was in New York probably once a month. I just avoided him. And finally, I figured, all right, I need to go. I need to go see him again. I still can't quite remember how it all played out. I was nervous as all get out going into this meeting. We had the pleasantries, and I asked about his kids, and we talked about business. Gave him the whatever the updates were on the university. And he said, and he bailed me out here. He said, so you asked me about a scholarship last night. So he brought it. I was avoiding for whatever reason. Well, we know why I was avoiding it. He's like, yeah, however we got to that, he's like, do you know why I said no? And I'm like, I don't know why you said no. He's like, so if I give you $100,000 today and you put that into, an endowment, it's like, how much are you going to be able to give for a scholarship? I did my math, like 5% quick, probably about $5,000. It's like, $5,000 isn't going to do a thing for a student at WashU. It's like, what would it take to cover a student their tuition?
I love it.
Like it would be $1 million. $1 million would generate about 50,000. We'd be able to cover one student throughout. He's like, then let's do $1 million scholarship. So I didn't even ask for my first million, but I still counted.
So what is the lesson?
The lesson there is really, and I should also say, again, I still was learning about wealth, and
yep.
At this point, I'm probably 27, 28. It still hadn't quite registered that somebody could just wire me $1 million.
Yep.
Not feel it.
Yep.
So really understanding, I think for young fundraisers now as a manager, making sure they understand we have these ratings, but what do they mean? How do you use that information to inform the ask that you're going to make? I went in and asked for $100,000 without having done any of that prep work.
Yeah.
For what I should ask.
I wonder, sometimes, we've learned that the more you can frame, right, the investment and impact, that can be a way as well to really socialize and pressure test what a donor might be willing to do before you throw out a number. And so in this case, it really was, he wanted he wanted to know that I'm taking care of at least one student, period. That was something that aligned, dollars wise and impact wise, as opposed to I can take care of 1/10 of a student's tuition every single year. That wasn't enough of an impact. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity to, I think about this a lot. Philanthropy is the only industry in the world where the price point could be a $5 annual fund gift or a $500 million transformational naming opportunity and everything in between. And so when your price points are $5 to, let's say $50 million in general, how do you start to frame around, 10,000 a year versus 100,000 versus $1 million? And so maybe there's an opportunity to say, hey, look, these are what different gift amounts mapped to our priorities and my understanding of your interests. This is the kind of impact that we could have. And it's a balance because you don't want to give somebody 10 options. But maybe if you'd said, hey, look, here's what 100,000, $1 million, and 5 million mean. Mm-hmm. What's your reaction to that? Could he have opted into the $1 million scenario earlier? And so how do you think about the $100,000 clear ask versus let me present a small menu of options?
Well, I think, Brent, you've hit on something, and I do that a lot now, in my work of, just as a subtle, especially early in relationships, showing that sort of map and, where do you see yourself? It's sort of what consultants do in feasibility studies. It's that same idea. We can use that in our work. This individual could have given me $5 million that day, and it wouldn't have changed his life in any way. To your point, had I shown him what that impact would have been, instead of supporting one student, you can support that one student for 4 years, and we're going to add a freshman each year. So then you're going to have a cohort of students that are always being supported.
Yeah.
I think your point is excellent. That the option, the menu, in a sense, as long as you keep it within reason, can be really effective. The other thing, if I can, Brent, just on that,
please.
So this individual went on to join the board of trustees, made 2 8-figure gifts after I had left the university, probably had done many other things. And, I have a lot of pride as I look back and think, that first meeting I had with him, he was a $5,000 donor. If my boss hadn't strategized the need to transition prospects thoughtfully, there's a very good chance that he would have gone unseen.
Totally. And look, I think that's one of the areas where how many people like that are going unseen right now. And I think it is the difference between, you can only market your way to so much success. At the end, ultimately it is that one-to-one conversation, the relationship, you getting shot down, going back, re-engaging, and ultimately leading to tens of millions of dollars in lifetime value that may have been perpetually a $5,000 donor. And I think that's one of the areas where, as a vendor, in the midst of all this digital transformation that's going on out there, how can we do a better job to make sure people like that can't just hang around in the middle of the giving pyramid, getting whatever stewardship comes out associated with that annual gift without being challenged, without having the opportunity to engage one-to-one with the fundraiser. And I think coming out of the pandemic, we've got an opportunity to scale that kind of conversation by way of technology like this, much deeper in the giving pyramid than ever before.
No, we do. And we have a way to connect our donors and our prospects with faculty and deans and other alumni. And
I don't want to skip over your time at RIT or St. John Fisher, because I know that you generated a lot of results. At the University of Rochester or St. John Fisher, but I do want to make sure that we get to share with the audience why, what inspired me to invite you specifically today, which was a couple of weeks ago. I saw a post that you had put out on LinkedIn where you said, I did something pretty amazing today. I did a discovery visit via Zoom with an 88 grad in Hong Kong, and that donor apologized to you for being disconnected. And, in the past, a year ago, 2 years ago, there's a really good chance that you either would have never even thought to conduct that visit via Zoom, even though that was a thing a few years ago, right? Or you would have waited to schedule the trip to Hong Kong and try to, do all the logistics and expense associated with it. So just tell me a little bit more about that conversation and what inspired you to share it on LinkedIn. And it got an amazing reaction from our peers.
Yeah, I think, I had done some of the international work at the University of Rochester, but I never had worked Zoom, occasionally a phone call, but, Zoom hadn't been factored into my work. So I would, you would go on these long, jaunts through Asia and you make multiple stops. And, they're great and they're productive, but then you don't do it again for 6 months or a year. Just because it is expensive and it takes a lot of time and you're doing lots of other things. And so I, in my time at RIT, really was getting a sense through conversations with peers on campus and just looking through some of the data. There's a real opportunity for us internationally. I'm a big believer that there's significantly more wealth and more wealth being created outside of the US than inside of the US. The tricky part is figuring out how you get the money to the US, if that's your end result. But we have benefits, there are enrollment benefits and lots of things beyond just philanthropy, but philanthropy as well. And so it was really credit to a great research team who identified this alumnus in Hong Kong who, very successful family business, but now sitting in a very prominent government appointed position dealing with startups and venture creations and that work that is very critical to what we do at RIT. How do we facilitate the relationship? Got the visit immediately, I'm prepared to do these things at 4 a.m. or 6 a.m, whatever I have to do. And, he was very gracious, and we met at 9 a.m., so 10 p.m. his time. And it was just a wonderful conversation. As I mentioned, he first apologized to me. It's been 30 years. I should reference the other thing. We know through our research that we found that in addition to his success, he has a direct family link to, one of the wealthiest people in the world. And a known philanthropist. So we're like, okay, how can we facilitate that? But this first conversation was really just talking about his RIT experience. Learned that he's still very good friends with his roommates from this time. That he was on campus 4 years ago and took his 2 young children. He went to the apartment where he lived. This was a really important, meaningful place for him. And he really wants to be involved and give back. And so, since that time, we've, WhatsApped, a few times through messaging. I'm pulling in our VP of research to have a conversation with him. How can we, he shared that they had this NOHK, over $1 billion of strategic investment from the Hong Kong government, $1 billion US investment for foreign universities to partner with this, enterprise that they have going on. And we should have been in that, but we had no relationship with them.
Right.
So all of that, I came out of that, and I've been a skeptic through. I'm a big believer that we can sustain relationships via Zoom, but I wasn't so sure you could really start meaningful engagements that way. And my mind was completely changed, and knowing that we're all facing the same thing, I figured I was just inspired, and I threw it out on LinkedIn, and you're right. It was the response was fun to see, and hear some other people's stories, and it's just a good reminder for us all that this is a great tool that even when we do go back to face, which we absolutely need to do, we're just going to be that much more effective and able to stay in touch with people much more regularly.
Yeah. Look, I think you're spot on. And that is a narrative out there that, I feel strongly that the narrative that, well, Zoom's fine for existing relationships, but not new ones. I think it's an excuse. I think it's a crutch, just like some of the brochures. And we have to challenge it, because not only can Zoom be good for new relationships, I think it can be better than if you had just flown by yourself to Hong Kong and done all that work, because you can now bring in the VP of institutional research or the dean or the president or a student who's a beneficiary. And I think this idea that we can now orchestrate a more holistic experience by bringing people in who in the past either could not have traveled or it would have taken months to get calendars aligned can make it an even better experience for new prospects. So yeah, if you're just going to do, standard Zoom, is it the same as going out and meeting somebody? No, it's not quite as good. It's a lot more efficient, but that's the challenge. How can we make it even better because of digital, not just something we have to accept, during the pandemic?
Right. And we're building a regional major gifts program, which is new concept for RIT, but what we had at WashU, what we replicated at the University of Rochester, and it just works really, really well, especially when you're in a position needing to get to know and meet a lot of people. And I think as we're building this program, it's a great entry point. Hey, I'm building the RIT network in Dallas. I'm not going to be able to get down there due to COVID for probably 6 months or longer, but it would be great if we could just have, an initial meeting.
Love it.
So we're really pushing our fundraisers as we build this team. Start now. Have a little bit of a relationship so that when you do get down there, your first 3 trips are built. You know who you want to see, and you also know who isn't maybe worth your time, or at least not worth a major gift officer's time.
Fair enough. I love that story. Thanks for sharing, and I hope we can keep that momentum. One of the other topics, and I want to be sensitive of time, but you feel strongly, and you've shared, we don't place enough value on the worth of an exceptional major gift officer, and that's something you've obviously given a lot of thought. Maybe you've experienced yourself. I know at one point you had to make a difficult decision in your career where you had to trade love and mission for what you were doing for significant, compensation improvements that only emerged as a result of shifting the role and shifting the institution. So why do you feel we don't place enough value on the worth of an exceptional MGO?
I'm not sure why we don't, but I think, and I suspect most people can relate to this. If you want to advance in this field, you have to manage people, and then you have to move up the pipeline. And I've seen a lot of cases where really good major gift officers do not make really good managers. And in the process, we take them away from doing what they're really good at. But we all have, families, personal obligations, whatever it is that we want to provide for, as well as, a hope that we might be able to retire ourselves one day and be some level of philanthropist ourselves. And so you want to grow, especially, I'm talking mainly about compensation. And far too often, and still in our industry, you have to do that by leaving that pure major gift officer role and becoming, a manager, a DOD, a director, an AVP. I think we have a lot of work to do in educating in the university space, university human resource professionals who everything fits in a box for them. And so if you manage this many people, then you're in this pay band. And well, if you don't manage everyone, then we can't pay you there and you max out. And, that everywhere I've worked, that's been the hurdle each time when I try to get a really good fundraiser, more compensation. Well, but they don't manage anyone. No, but they generated $3.5 million 3 years in a row.
So not speaking specifically to RIT, but you've been around the sector, you've worked at publics, privates, you name it. What the average, let's just say for a high producing major gift officer raising $3 million a year, roughly what the industry comp standard would be today. Where do you think it should go? Because by the way, there are strength coaches on football teams making $500,000 a year, not to mention the head coach making $7 million a year with massive bonus incentives linked to performance. Why? Because it generates revenue for the institution. So why is there such a perceived, maybe it seems like a bit of a double standard not to put you on the spot too much, but what's the gap that we're talking about here?
So let me first preface one thing to say that I've had wonderful experiences in my short time at RIT, and I'm optimistic that we're going to make some headway here. I haven't had to have this debate yet. I think the gap is potentially some of these individuals are making 50% of what they should. It might even be bigger than that.
So they're making 150, but maybe should be making 300. They're making 100,
making 200. Yeah. I think they're going to return it, and if we don't, they're going to go somewhere else. That's the other thing. My one regret about my career is that, I spent 7 years at the University of Rochester, but that's the longest tenure I've had anywhere. And I would love to be able to stay at an institution and take these relationships 20 years. And that's what I'm looking to do here at RIT. I'm so excited about where we have the potential to take this program. But if I have to reintroduce major gift officers every 2 or 3 years, and look, I am that person. I left WashU to go to the University of Rochester to get, more than a 50% pay raise, and an opportunity to advance professionally so that I could get to the seat that I'm in now. Admittedly, I wanted this seat. This was a goal, but it's not for everyone, nor is everyone right for it. And so in a perfect world, a major gift officer performing at the level I was at WashU, there should have been a way to recognize and compensate that. It didn't exist.
Look, it's an important conversation. You couldn't go to a case conference or other conferences and not hear about the challenges of major gift turnover, the tenure issues, the whiplash donors get when they're constantly being introduced to a new person. Yet nobody's said maybe we're just doing it wrong. Maybe we're not. I mean, some people have said it, right? I talked about Rod Grabowski, who's talked University of Buffalo vice president, who shared some good thinking on more compelling incentive bonus plans. But it is a little bit confusing to me that we're just constantly asking ourselves, well, why is the turnover set so high? But at the same time, we're not able to be more flexible and creative to really reward people financially. Like, people shouldn't feel guilty about wanting to do well for their family, even though they're working in a mission-driven sector. And I think sometimes people do feel guilty, and you just shouldn't have to. And instead, you got to go take the leap and switch jobs, and that's a way to get around it.
Right. Yeah, and it's just unfortunate. We've got to figure out what the solution is, and Rod's right down the street, and Rod and I should put our heads together and take some of his thought leadership in this area and see what we can do with it.
It at least warrants some experimentation, some testing, some measurement. Can we run a pilot where we're able to create a path where you could spend 10 years in advance because you produce more without having to go and take a leap to manage people, even if that's not what you really want to do or what you're great at, but it's the only ticket to getting paid more.
Right. And I think I may have foregone, if there were a lucrative compensation path earlier in my career, I probably would have foregone, this administrative path that I
right. Yeah.
So yeah, and it's I want to say, because I think it's important. I don't believe we are sales people, and I don't think we should have direct commission type structures. But certainly retention bonuses and certain things like that. We need to figure that out, because we need to retain the good people, to the best of our ability. And then when we don't, if I can get one other point, because I wanted to my $1 million gift story earlier, what was so critical to that million was that transition that happened when a staff member leaving transitioned that prospect to me. I did the same thing when I left to go to the University of Rochester. I transitioned that among all of my, high potential donors to one of my good friends. And he takes the credit for those gifts that came.
Yep.
And I think
how often, Phil, is that handoff not done well? I mean, I can't ask you to generalize too much, but to the extent you can, because it seems like just a huge opportunity for loss or gain, depending on how well it's done.
We let our egos get in the way sometimes. Somewhere that I had worked previously, when I, gave my notice, and every time I've left a job, I've done it with, I'm glad to be here for 2 months if you want me here and I can be productive, and I'm glad to be here for 2 weeks if you want me to go. One comment that's never left my mind is, if you don't want to be here, then you might as well just go now. Well, that's just the run. I hurt your ego because I left, and instead of thinking about all of the good work that because again, these relationships, these people, a lot of them become like family. You have to make sure you always keep it a business relationship, but you care about them, and you've invested a lot of time, and you don't want them to just drop. And there are so many people that you go through contact history and you see like good work for 18 months, silence for 3 years. What happened? That person left. And then thankfully an entrepreneurial fundraiser scooped them up somehow and started again. So we need to be really thoughtful about how we manage transition, which is why, again, I like having a hybrid regional school college based staff, because our best prospects should know their regional person and they should know their school or college person. One of those two will manage that relationship, but it's important to me that our best prospects have more than one point of contact at the institution. And we did that really well at Rochester, I thought, and we're trying to do it now here.
So I need to conclude. I want to be sensitive of your time, but one of the things that I've been asking the leaders that we're interviewing is, are you hiring? It's obviously been a challenging year. I'm sure you received major curveballs to your budget that you didn't expect when you joined, but where are you now? You've been really transparent, great candor on the show today, and I know people have gotten a sense for how you think. What is the future of RIT advancement? What are you excited about?
I am. So lots of things are happening. We're in the home stretch of $1 billion campaign. So we are closing in on 800 million on our way to $1 billion. So a couple of years left there. We're building this regional program that I mentioned. So we have right now 3 active regional major gift positions open. We're going to have a college director position opening due to a retirement of someone after 17 years. So the example of someone who stayed and did tremendous work in his 17-year RIT career. We're going to have some more junior level, some associate and assistant director positions in the colleges. We're going to be hiring a parent fundraising position. So there are all in, I think I have about 15 vacancies, 11 of which are fundraising positions. And that's a shift we recently made. We were 25% fundraising staff when I got here. We'll be about 36% of the staff will be fundraisers when we're fully focused. If you want to raise more, you've got to ask more people for more money. That's my belief. So there are
even that shift probably could be a whole other episode. I'm really eager to see how that goes. But 11 open positions right now just in fundraising. Frankly, it's refreshing to hear that during what has been so many we're freeze or furlough or whatever the buzzword has been. So if you're interested, take a look at what's going on at RIT, and I think LinkedIn's probably a great way to reach out to Phil as well.
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and as we post things, we're not posting them all at once, but we'll post them staggered over the next 6 to 9 months. Every time we post something, I'm going to put it out on LinkedIn. So if we're connected, we'll see it, and we're excited about what we're doing here, and I've assembled just a phenomenal leadership team, and how I feel about the University of Rochester program from when I got there to when I left is how I think we're going to feel about RIT when we look back 5-10 years from now.
Super inspiring. And, I would just say, for whatever it's worth, Phil, there's still not enough advancement leaders that are actively posting on LinkedIn and sharing perspective. I think we're seeing a growth there. But compared to other sectors, I think that voice is still lacking to a certain regard. So I'd encourage you to keep doing it. It's really neat to see the conversations and help people learn again, especially in a fully virtual environment, which hopefully ends really, really soon here.
All right. Well, Brent, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, thanks, Phil. This was a lot of fun. Be well. Take care.
Bye.